Namaste. Welcome. Friends, we are back. And we are back with a very interesting talk for you. Today we have Honorable Dr. Nicholas Kazanas who is joining us from Athens, Greece. Dr. Kazanas is a distinguished Indologist, historian, and Sanskrit expert. All in. Friends, I am sure that you know that Government of India has just declared its Padma Awards. And I am pleased to share with you that Dr. Nicholas Kazanas has also been honored by the Government of India with the Padma Awards. So let us give a warm welcome to Padma Shri Dr. Nicholas Kazanas. Thank you. As I said just now, a moment before, that today's topic is very interesting, very important. Rather, I would say it has got intercontinental importance. And the topic is the affinities between ancient India and Greece. Friends, I am aware that the idea of ancient India and Greece evokes bad memories of Alexander's invasion and the controversy of Pythagoras theorem. That is a situation we have to face. Very unfortunate that we are running the 72 years of independence. Still, we have to face up such a situation. Today, when India has set up new standards, scaled up new heights, we are there in the United Nations Security Council. Still, we are not able to defend our true history, right? Our left-leaning journalist friends rush to make negative headlines, bold headlines. If anybody, whether historian or a social leader or a political leader, ever mentions the Pythagoras came to India and it is here he learned astronomy or trigonometry. But I have valuable information for our left-leaning journalists that around 208 years ago, not now, beyond their imagination, 208 years ago, it was John Adams, second president of United States, who wrote to third president of United States, Thomas Jefferson, that we should study the ancient civilization. It is there where humanity flourished. And in continuation, he mentions that the Pythagoras, in fact, traveled to India. He learned trigonometry there and came up with the theorem that we know as Pythagoras theorem. So, my dear journalist friends, please be open to alternate facts, alternate narrative of history, not even alternate, but whatever is evidence based, right? So, thank you, audience. So, anyway, before passing on the baton to the guest speaker, I would like to tell you what is important, why we should know about the work that Dr. Nicholas Kazanas, the guest speaker, has produced. It is phenomenal. You know, Dr. Nicholas Kazanas is the first distinguished scholar, first historian of the world who drew our attention towards matter of the fact that migration and invasion are two different phenomena. You cannot replace invasion with the migration or the vice versa. I would appeal to our left-leaning historians of GNU in order to understand what is an invasion. They should watch the Great Chinese War, which was constructed in third century BCE, and since then the repair work and the reconstruction has been continued up to 14th century common era, 14th century CE, 1,000 years of time. Chinese emperor and people spent in order to protect themselves from the invading Central Asian tribes, the nomadic tribes. So this is the tale of invasion. And what is migration? They are suggested to please study the Great Jewish Migration. That happened in Russia starting with 1881. And this migration has been studied well. let me tell you that uh, a scholar Ravenstein studied the great Jewish migration, and he came up with law of migration. His name was Ravenstein. Ravenstein studied the Jewish migration. Out of 4.1 million population, half 2 million Jews migrated out of Russia, seeking asylum in United States and other countries. That was a massive migration. Aryans, if really came to India, they came to India in a huge number. It may be bigger than just a migration. It can be compared with an exodus. Because this phenomena of Aryan invasion or the migration brought demographic changes. As per the left-leaning historians in India, is their narrative states that the demography of India changed, language changed, the native people, nobody knows who were those native people. No, native people, perceived native people of India were pushed back to south, and then, as it is common with the left-leaning historians, the history of conflicts began. The history of Vedic India or ancient India begins with a conflict. So there is a request, there is an appeal to our historians. Please study the history of this study of migrants. Migrants are asylum-seeking people. They want shelter, they want food, they want security. They do not bring a demographic change. Anyway, in the entire history of mankind, it is never ever seen or noted that migrants would introduce a demographic change. Okay, so Dr. Nicholas Kazanas' work does not stop here only, to this point only. He also produced a few more things which requires our attention, and those two things are his study of Hittite, the language of Hittite people. He is one of the earliest scholars of the world who drew our attention that in Hittite, the terms of immediate family, the terms denoting immediate family relationships, are not common words with common words with Indo-European. I mean to say, the eight terms denoting primary family relationships are not shared words between Hittite and Indo-European languages, including Sanskrit. That means the family, the, the idea of family was different in Hittite than Indo-European people. What are those eight relationships? Father, mother, brother, sister, husband, wife, son, and daughter. So how come without these eight words, without these eight common words, the same family, same culture can be perceived? It is impossible. But our historians have not paid attention to it. Even now, I hope some change will come after this talk. Dr. Nicholas Kazanas' another contribution is that he studied and written a comprehensive paper showing the Avestan language came from the Vedic Sanskrit. And the strong argument that he raises is 59 common words between Avestan language and the and the later Vedic Sanskrit. Right. So if 59 words of later Vedic period are found to be common, that means the division between Indian Aryans, Indo-Aryans, and the Iranian branch of Aryans came later, when this commonality of the words was already existing between the two. So it is unlikely, rather impossible, that the division happened earlier and the common words, you know, introduced between these two languages later. Hope you understand what Dr. Nicholas Kazanas wants us to understand. I have something to share with you. A very brief. Stay with me. I'm going to share a few slides. One moment. So it is Dr. Nicholas Kazanas receiving Padma Award from Indian Ambassador of Greece. And here, summary of what I have explained to you just the difference between invasion and migration, Hittite and others, the Jews, and wow, and wow. This is a map that Dr. Nicholas Kazanas has prepared while advocating the out of out of India theory for the Indian Vedic Aryans, and he has got solid evidences. This is the map that that is improvised by somebody called Lara Novako. She is a Serbian citizen. She improvised this map and connects from India to Afghanistan, from Afghanistan to Iran, Iran to Syria, Syria to Turkey, and another branch goes into Eastern Europe. It is important to give credit to the scholars who do some fundamental original. This is the Chinese wall, which I mentioned to you. A wall which has been maintained by Chinese people for 1,000 years to protect themselves from the incoming invading nomadic tribes of Central Asia. And this is an acknowledgement of something personal, a personal gratitude to the scholarship of Dr. Nicholas Kazanas. When a decade ago I was in a fierce debate with the best historians of the world from Harvard, Cambridge, Oxford. So Dr. Nicholas suggested me to make a scholarly impression on my counterpart. I should start using transliterated fonts. And the most popular fonts, transliterated fonts, were the Harvard Kyoto fonts, which is something I never appreciate and like because Harvard Kyoto transliteration is the most unscientific transliteration. They use capital letters to denote the emphasis given on the certain syllables of Sanskrit. So I never used it. Rather, I decided to go for the ISO Sanskrit transliteration, ISO Kolkata Sanskrit transliteration. When Dr. Nicholas Kazanas published his paper, which I mentioned earlier, AIT and the World Scholarship. So he was attacked by a good number of historians. Dr. J.P. Mallory, he was one of them. He is author of two bestsellers, Encyclopedia of Indo-European Culture and In Search of the Indo-Europeans. Anybody who wants to address these issues, whether for and against, has to go through these books and make its logic or the argument. Next comes the Edwin Brandt. He had a sympathetic stand, but he is also not agreeing that Aryans are the indigenous people, as Dr. Nicholas Kazanas has shown in his books. Then comes Colin Renfrew. He is given the title of Lord for his theory that Indo-European language or Indo-European people originated in Anatolia, Turkey. And according to him, it is the Anatolia in Turkey where from Aryans migrated to India, Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and then the western part of Indus. However, Dr. Colin Renfrew could not answer to my query that if agriculture started and the Aryans were agriculturists, why does The Turkic language does not have a word for domesticated bull, which is there in the Sanskrit. The word is Bali Vard. Vard. Vard denotes the domesticated bull, which none of the European languages have got. There is no cognate of Vard, the domesticated bull, which is used for the farming purpose. And a good part of it that he stopped putting emphasis on his thesis after the debate with me. Then it is Michael Witzel. He is a good Vedic scholar. He studied Vedas, aware of it, but for some biasness, what he presents differently. According to him, Vedic Sanskrit has got some Munda substrate. Munda means substrate means foundation. So Munda words or the Dravidian words form the fundamentals, foundations of Vedic Sanskrit. Still he claims the Sanskrit is a language of the invaders or the migrants. If that is true, the Sanskrit should have Dravidian or the Munda superstrate. Sanskrit would come first, and the people who are speaking Sanskrit, they would learn new words from the existing languages, existing dialects spoken by the native people. So this would create superstratum, not the substratum. But he knows something, and he has a habit of presenting it upside down in the reverse direction. And then it comes Elena Kuzmina. She is a celebrated author of history of Indo-Iranians, not the Indo-Aryans. And she claims, like others, from the Western language, the Sanskrit is born. So these are the challenging area for our scholars also. If they want to write on the Vedic history or the Aryan history, they have to face, they should take the challenge or go with them. It is their choice, but they have to undergo these authors' works, these historians' work. Thank you. Now I would like to invite Dr. Nicholas Kazanas to give his talk. Thank you.
I would like to start with a prayer, if I may, in Sanskrit. You all know this. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina, Sarve Santu Niramaya, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. I would also like to make a passing remark on the previous, on what was said by the previous talker. I don't know his name. I wasn't there from the beginning, but he did say something very profound about Agni not being the material fire that we use for cooking and heating, but it being an force within man. All gods, all deities in the Rig Veda are said to be within man. Veda says so very clearly when in one hymn it says that all divinities are within man as cows in a cow peg. Now, I don't know what exactly it is expected of me to say, but I will proceed with pointing out some affinities between Greek culture and Vedic culture. And I will start with some of the deities. Now you all know God Aryaman, the god of contracts and harmony and equilibrium. There is the same god, or at least the same name, in Mycenaean Greece around about 1500 before the Common Era, and his name was Aryamani. He did not survive into the classical period, but I suspect that the name Ares, the god of war, is a derivative. Then you know your Ashwin, the two brothers, Ashwinau. In ancient Greece, again in Mycenaean Greek, a god Ikeja. Now this doesn't sound very much like Ashwin, but in fact, by comparative linguistics, it is the same name. He also, this deity also did not survive into the classical period. Then we have the Vedic goddess Ushas, the Lady of the Dawn. She survived into the classical period as Eos, Lady Dawn again. Homer praises her continuously and begins practically all his rhapsodies with the beginning that when the rosy-fingered dawn appears, then action begins. Then there is the Ribhu. The Ribhu, as you know, were three brothers who are known by a common name, Ribhu. Now, this name has come into Greece as Orpheus. He was not a deity, but he was a great demigod, profitable in music and poetry. It is said that when he sang and played his lyre, all animals fell quiet and followed him. Then there is Dios, heaven. This deity comes into Greece as Zeus, the god of heaven and thunder and lightning. He is the king of the gods. Then we have Bhaga. Bhaga appears in Greek as Phoebus, the sun god, or at least one aspect of the sun god. He appears also as Bageos. He is a particular form of Zeus in Asia Minor. Then you have a strange goddess Saranyu, daughter of Vashtra, the creator god. Now you know the legend of Saranyu, or perhaps she got married to Vivaswant, the sun god, but she decided to leave him and left behind a shadow image. She became a horse. And Vivaswant tried to find her and eventually did find her and joined with her and had some progeny. Now the same legend, almost exactly the same, appears in Greek. In Mycenaean Greek, she appears as a goddess in her own right, Erinus. But then in the classical period, we hear of a peculiar legend how the goddess of earth, Demeter, is harassed by Poseidon, the ocean god, and to escape his harassment, she becomes Emea, somewhere in the meadows of Middle Greece, Poseidon, who desires her, asks his friend where she might be, and the sun tells him. So he appears also as a horse and mounts her, and out of their union come forth a splendid horse called Areion, the best of horses, and a daughter called Despina. So you see there's a lot of similarity here. Then there's God, sunlight, Surya. Surya appears in Greek as Helios. He appears in most Indo-European languages. Then there is Lord Varuna, who appears in Greece as Uranos, the god of heaven, god of justice also. Is Vastoshpati. There is a whole hymn in the Rig Veda about this minor deity. Now he appears in Greek as a female deity, the deity of the house, Vastos, Pati, the god, the lord of the house, and he was a form of fire and spirit of the household. And in Greek, Hestia, and in Latin, Vesta, is the goddess of the hearth, the spirit of consciousness in the house. So we have these cognate names and cognate gods in Sanskrit and in Greek. There is also the legend or history of the 4 Yugani. You find that in the Mahabharata and then in many Puranas. Ashad or Krita Yuga, the first and longest, and then Treta, then Dwapara, and then Kali Yuga. You find them also in Manusmriti, where in the first book, I think, the great lawgiver Manu gives the particular virtue for each of these ages, so that in Kali Yuga we have Dana, in Dwapara we have Yajna, in Treta we have knowledge, and in the Sad Yuga, I think, I can't remember, but you correct me, I think it's tapas, but I'm not 100% certain. I'm afraid I've forgotten. Now, this scheme of human evolution or devolution appears in one of our ancient poets, Hesiod. He wrote 2 well-known books. One is Theogony, and the other is Labor and Days, Erga kai Hemere. Now, in about, shortly after the beginning, in line 109, he talks about 5 generations of men. And the first generation is the golden generation, known also as the golden age. Then there is the silver generation, known also as the silver age. Then there is the bronze age, or the bronze generation. Then there is the generation of heroes, demigods, or the era of demigods and heroes. And then there is the Iron Age, the age in which we are now. There is not much detail, and the descriptions in Hesiod are somewhat confused. In the Vedic tradition, narration gives much more detail and tells us that in each yuga, virtue gets diminished by a quarter, so that in Kali Yuga we are left with only 1/4 of virtue, justice, longevity, energy, and so on. Hesiod is somewhat confused, and he probably has several versions of the tale, because the tale appears also in Iranian literature, and then again in the Judaic tradition. And in the Iranian tradition, you have the metals. We don't have metals in the Vedic tradition. I assume that Hesiod did have the original tale from the original Vedic and Indo-European tradition, but he also had something from the Iranian tradition and married the two, giving us 5 generations and also the metallic quality. Now the age, the generation of the heroes and the demigods, heroes like Hercules and Achilles and Theseus and so on. Now this corresponds, of course, to the transitional period between the yugas, and then obviously reflects the destruction of the Kshatriya class. Of which we hear in the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. So we have all these mythological and religious parallels. There are many more. I would like to go on with another aspect, which has to do with the ocean. In some hymns of the Rig Veda and the Atharva Veda, and even in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, we hear of the ocean being a cosmic force, and also flooding the entire space-time continuum, and in it floats the as a sphere, sometimes as a disk. You have that in Book 1, 164th hymn. In Book 7, Book 9, Book 10. You also have it in Atharva Veda, Book 12. And also the streams flowing in heaven. In classical Greece, we have a similar mythologism. In Plato, in his dialogue Cratylus, Plato mentions Homer saying that Ocean is the begetter of all things, together with Tethys and another goddess. And Homer mentions this in Iliad, the 18th Rhapsody. In the 18th Rhapsody, we have a description of Achilles' shield, which has the ocean surrounding the earth and forming the brim of his shield. Now you have again a narrative in Hesiod, this time in Theogony, his other book. So the mythological parallels are many, as you can gather. I have dealt with them in several articles showing that there was no contact between Greek culture and Vedic culture before Alexander, there must be a genetic relation. Now, some scholars who have not delved very deeply into the subject claim that Greece borrowed or Indians borrowed, or that they both met in Persia, and these ideas spread from one culture to the other. This is not possible. In the Persian king's court, it is true that there were some sages from India and some sages from Greece, but this was pretty late to begin with. This was around the 6th century, 6th century. And in any case, many of these aspects of mythology do not appear in the Persian tradition. So, if they came into the king's court in Persia, they should appear somewhere in the Persian tradition, but none of these ideas appear in the Persian tradition. And even the four yugas appear in a dream by a king, and it is a tree with metallic branches, as I said earlier, and this is the only one that is common to all three traditions. Now, of course, Avestan, the ancient Persian language, is very, very close. In fact, it is the closest language to Sanskrit. And the grammar is very similar, and also many of the hymns contain much material that is very much like the Sanskrit material. I very extensively with this subject in one of my articles, and I included that when I revised it in one of my books, a book that Professor Soma Basu mentioned, Vedic and Indo-European Studies. Now, in my books, I have two main themes. The first theme is that the Vedic people are indigenous. I did accept as a student, and for many years afterwards, the Aryan invasion theory, but later in life I delved into it very thoroughly and got convinced that it's just imagination and repetition and nothing more. The facts are quite different, and there is nothing to support, nothing at all to support the Aryan invasion theory. So I became an indigenist, and practically all my studies had this as an aim, to show that, or at least the Vedic people, were indigenous, and that in fact the wider Sapta Sindhu area, the land of the 7 rivers, the river Sindhu and the river Saraswati, as it was in the 3rd millennium, and the larger area encompassing Bactria, was in fact the source of the Indo-Europeans. I don't think Vedic itself, as we have it today, is the original language, because it is obvious in the Rig Veda that it is changing. You have, for instance, to take one example, the nominative plural dual, sorry, the nominative dual in classical period is Ashvinau. Now, in the oldest books in the Rig Veda is Ashvina. So what we find is there is a change, and we find this with several other grammatical forms. So we must assume that the original Vedic language was slightly different. And I think from this original Vedic language, which was very difficult, much more powerful than the one we have, arose the other Indo-European languages. But it is very, very difficult to reconstruct this older Vedic language, or the Proto-Indo-European, as it is called in European and Western scholarship. Now, this was one of my main, and the other major aim was to show that the Rig Veda is very old. I wouldn't go so far as to say that it was 1 million years old. I don't think I would agree with that, but it is certainly ready by the 4th millennium BCE. The Rig Veda talks of Saraswati as a great river flowing from the mountains to the ocean. Now, the only period that the Saraswati could have done that was before 3800 BCE. They have changed now. They may have gone back to 4000 or 3600, 3000, 2000, but 200. But that's the period. The best evidence seems to be 3800 BCE. So all names that talk of Saraswati as Naditama, Devitama, goddess, Ambidama, must be from that period. It can't be later than that. Western scholarship, and I'm afraid very much Indian scholarship, which imitates Western scholarship, accepts the date of 1200 BCE. This is much late, much too late. The Rig Veda is much earlier. There are many things in the Harappan civilization For instance, large cities and towns and large buildings. The Rig Veda knows nothing about this. It seems to me ridiculous that somebody would be writing hymns in 1200 and not mention the previous cities that existed in that area, because it is agreed even by Western scholars that the Rig Veda hymns were composed in the Saraswati Sindhu area, in the in the land of the seven rivers, Sapta Sindhu. Now, if there were cities there, surely Rig Veda would have at least one mention. It's like writing today a novel and not mentioning skyscrapers or telephones, mobile telephones or Skype or computers or things like that. So there are many other aspects. The silver is unknown in Rig Veda, but there was plenty of silver during the Harappan civilization. Again, this should have been known in Rig Veda and many other objects. I listed once about 15 such objects that existed in the Harappan civilization, but Veda knows nothing of them. So the Rig Veda is the most ancient document in human history. I may be a bit crazy, but do present in my books and my articles, and I would invite anybody who thinks I am a bit crazy to read and see for themselves the evidence and then judge. I have published books in many Western journals, university journals, Italy, England, and America. So, if I was crazy, they wouldn't have published my papers, or if they were exaggerated. I had very heated arguments with these people, but I was not thrown out. Now, I would like to examine some one or two linguistic aspects. The Vedic language, or Sanskrit, I'll call it Sanskrit to avoid Vedic language, rich and highly organized language, more than any other language on earth. Greek comes very close, as I said, Avestan is very close to it, then comes Greek. Greek has many grammatical similarities with Avestan and Sanskrit. It has also a very large vocabulary that is cognate with Sanskrit. Now, I will take eight words that denote very close relationship among people. Mother, father, or father, mother, daughter, brothers and sisters. You couldn't have closer relations than that. Now, Sanskrit and Avestan are the only two languages that have all 8 words. Pitra, Matra, Patni, Sunu, Duhitra, Bhratra, Swasra. These are the 8 relations. We find them in Avestan also. But in all the other languages, some of these words are missing. They have 2 or 3, like father and mother and daughter and son, but they don't have some of the others. This applies to all Indo-European languages. Now, I started off with the deities. Now, in one of my studies, I collected, I hope I find it soon. Let's 20 names of gods and goddesses that are common to Sanskrit, that are there in Sanskrit. Of these, I gave you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Greek has 13 of these. All the other languages have 10 or less. They are not the same. Only Sanskrit has got the. Now, my argument is that this indicates that Vedic was all comprehensive and that the other languages branched off, taking bits and pieces from the original proto-Vedic culture. There is one other aspect I would like you to consider. In Sanskrit, daughter is Duhitra. Duhitra comes from the dhatu du.
आओ ये भी लेते जाना.
From this dhatu, we have many other words like doha, dohana, duhya, and so on and so forth. We also have the verb dogji, which declines, is conjugated like all other verbs in full. In all conjugations, it has its desideratives, it has its intensive. There are some about the names of 20 gods
20 words, yes.
In Sanskrit. Greek has 13 of them. The other languages have only got 10 or less, which shows that, in fact, they took bits and pieces from the original Proto-Vedic.
Okay, thank you.
Then there are the 8 relations. Father, mother, husband, wife, father, pitra, matra, patni, then son, shunu, daughter, duhitra, brother, bratra, and sister, swasra. Now, only Sanskrit and Avestan has got all 8 of them. The other languages have got 2, 3, 4, 5. Hittite, in fact, hasn't got any. Hittite is considered to be the first Indo-European language, and yet it hasn't got a single one of them, except Patti as a just man. Then I went on to Duhitra to show another aspect. Duhitra comes from Duh, the Dhatu Duh, which I think is the second Adi Gana. Now it has got cognates like Doha and Dohana and Duhia and Dohia and so on, and it's conjugated as very fully. It has present tense, past tense, future, and so on. Now, if you take the three cognate words in Greek, thugater, English, door, or Old Germanic, dauftar, and Lithuanian, dukte, and modern dukra, you'll find that these words stand isolated in language. They have no cognates. They have no other relatives in the language. They have no verbs, as Sanskrit does. Now, you can do this with several other, and I do that in my studies. I use several other such examples. States that languages branched off, taking bits and pieces from the Proto-Vedic, which to us is unknown now. I will give you another. You know, Anna, it comes from the Dhatu An, which is also from the Adadi Gana. Aniti. Now, An as Ana, Anana, Ana, Anana, and the verb conjugated in all tenses and moods. Now, it also has verbs with An, Ran, Udan, Saman, and so on. Now, the stem appears in Latin as anima. Anima, the breath of life. It appears in Greek as anemos. You see, anima, anemos. Anemos means wind. Two words in Latin and in Greek are isolated. They have no other cognates. They have no verbs. So here again, we have example of organic coherence. Sanskrit has organic coherence. It has, for most of its vocabulary, not all of it, there are many words that are not derived from dhatu, but originally the Proto-Vedic must have had dhatus for all its words, and it must have had more than 1,000 dhatus. In use we find 800, and in common use about 250, 300 dhatus. But originally there must have been many more. So I maintain that Sanskrit is the oldest language and much closer to the proto-language than any other language. And the Rig Veda is the oldest human document that we have. I have studied ancient documents, pyramid texts. I have studied Chinese original texts. The most important of that lot is Lao Tzu's I the I Te Ching, Tao Te Ching, which reads like an Upanishad. But the Vedic tradition you have in India, and you're very, very lucky to have it, quite remarkable in having the Rig Veda, the Atharva Veda, and the Upanishads. There are no documents like that anywhere else. Greek philosophers made investigation very thoroughly about things, but they did not formulate a system like the one you find in the Upanishads, and a system of cosmogony and anthropogony that is implied in the Rig Veda. Some scholars think that I apply Vedanta to explain the Rig Veda, but the Vedanta philosophy is there in the Rig Veda if you read it properly. Now, again, going back to what the previous speaker said about Agni being a force within man. Yes, it is one aspect of consciousness. The divine consciousness that is the great characteristic of man. And if you read some of the hymns, you see that that's exactly what it refers to. Now, it acknowledges that all the gods come from one Tad Ekam, as is this said in the Nasadiya Sukta in the 10th mandala. There was nothing but Tad Ekam, breathing, exhaling the creation and inhaling it back. And other than that, there was nothing else. So the Vedanta is implicit in the Rig Veda, but the Rig Veda is not a treatise on theology or anthropogony or philosophy. It's just hymns. But if you read hymns again and again, and you read them closely, then you see that Vedanta is behind and supporting it. There is also polytheism, yes, and there is also liturgy with yajna, yes, but the basic philosophical system from which the poets draw their images and their ideas is a kind of proto-Vedanta. And here I'll stop. I'll be going on for about an hour. So I leave it at that. I'll be quite happy to answer any questions you have. And I do have my free books here, if you wish me to talk about them and give you some idea of what I have investigated all these years and have put in writing. So I pass the ball to you. Shri Mishra.
Yes, sir. Dr. Nicholas Kazanas, I know somebody has been, many of them you have been asked, requesting me to give you an opportunity to ask the questions. So please ask the questions to Dr. Nicholas Kazanas as much as you can ask. Try to be benefited with his presence. So request our audience to raise questions to Vaisalaji. Please put your questions to Dr. Nicholas Kazanas.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir, for contributing your great insight with us. What is your idea on reconstruction of PIE?
What is my idea on what?
Reconstruction of PIE.
He means she means Proto-Indo-European language.
Reconstruction.
The reconstruction of Proto-Indo-European is rubbish. That's my view of it. You cannot reconstruct Proto-Indo-European, and certainly not in the way that they are going about it. Why? Because they are applying a socialist principle that all languages are equal. Well, they are not equal. Sanskrit is far above all the other languages, together with Avestan and Greek. Therefore, what is not in Sanskrit cannot be considered, this is my view, it's extreme view, but this is my view. What is not in Sanskrit cannot be considered Proto-Indo-European.
Thank you. Sir, I have one more question. Can I ask?
By all means.
Thank you, sir. That your analysis that rebus are also remembered in Greece. Is there linguistic root changing the theme?
The last words you.
Is there linguistic rule for changing the phoneme?
Is there linguistic
Rule.
So, she meant, is there a linguistic rule which makes the changes in the phoneme between Sanskrit and Greek, how the pronunciation is getting changed?
Yes, there are some, but they are not foolproof and they are not constant. For instance, the sound, the consonant da appears as delta in Greek. That's common, fine. Ya appears as z in Greek, but it also appears as the vowel iota. Sha, the palatal sha, as in Shakti, appears as sometimes as K in Greek. And not always, sometimes it appears as something else. The same applies to many other languages. Some rules are okay, but they are not foolproof. Are not constant. Sometimes they apply, sometimes they don't apply.
Thank you, sir.
It's all right?
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Dr. Kazanas, I would also like to ask a question to you, sir. That is, what could be the upper timeline when in ancient times Indian connect with Greek would have happened, the earliest period before, because we see in Rigveda there is a mention of Panis which are interpreted as the Phoenicians. So, was it before Phoenicians? If it was before Phoenicians, so how long back it can go into the past? I said in Rigveda we have mention of Panis. Panis means Phoenicians. So how old Indo-Greek connect could have been in terms of the historical timeline or the ancient connects? As you mentioned, phonetic transformation of the gods' names, but those gods are still remembered over there. How long back this earliest connect would have been established between India and Greece? That is my question, sir.
Now, there are legends in Greece that Pythagoras traveled east and that several other, that some other sages also came to India from Greece. But they are legends. There is no proof whatsoever that they came to India, and there is no indication of what they brought back from India. There's nothing specific Indian that came back, which Pythagoras taught the unity of creation and reincarnation. These were known in Greece before Pythagoras also.
Okay.